Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
Welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
I know, I had so much fun on the Ink Mages yesterday, so I'm glad you could be here on my Finding the Magic book podcast. We do have Angela R. Hughes with us today. It's YA fantasy, right?
It is actually, this is adult fantasy.
Adult fantasy,
just
okay.
because of the age of my characters.
Okay.
They're all, I think my youngest character's 23. So we're just a little above the YA limit in the typical ages of the characters, but it flows well for YA readers as well as adult fantasy readers.
So, Angela, your series is the Wanton Future Chronicles, and I kind of get goosebumps when I hear that because I'm such a big Merlin fan and all the legends and the myths around Merlin and magic, his magic and King Arthur. And so jump in and tell us about your series.
Well, this series has a unique take on the Arthurian legend. I've been a nerd of all things mythological, particularly any Celtic mythology. It's just one of my favorite things to read when it comes to storytelling, and just historically, I've been very, very, very nerdy about doing research on all of those kinds of things. And Arthurian legend is one of my favorite things because, you know, it's historical in the way that it's involved with the Welsh people and their history, and some of the original books written about King Arthur were called The History of the Kings. So it just kind of fascinated me, especially because my fantasies are historical fantasies. So they have kind of a real historical setting with a lot of fantasy elements. But my story takes place in kind of the really old tales of Arthurian legend back 400, 500 AD, post-Roman times, before there were castles and knights. There was, no round tables. So this is kind of more of a more old, archaic Arthurian legend. And my stories kind of kick off after Arthur's death. So Arthur dies at the very beginning. We kind of get that background in history in book one, and then we launch from there with Merlin. I have two real main POV characters. It's Merlin and my new character, Eleanor. And it kind of starts with the kingdom's been devastated. Arthur's dead. Merlin doesn't see where he can go from here. And one of the fun things about my series that I love to write, like I said, previous to the interview, Merlin's my muse, and I wrote a different kind of form of Merlin. I've always been fascinated by the character of Merlin, and I wanted to do my own version of him, and he is a younger Merlin. So he's a 30-something. He actually has connections to the fair folk, which gives him a long life. So he ages much more slowly, but he is a younger version of Merlin, and which makes him more of a hero than just kind of a wise mage. He's a warrior and a druid, and we kind of kick off where he's devastated and he feels like he might as well die too. Arthur's dead, all the promises gone, what's the use? And a huge theme throughout my stories is what do you do when every promise or everything you've hoped for has been utterly and completely devastated? Is there hope? Is there a reason to keep believing and keep fighting? Especially when in a world we live in, bad continues to happen. You get roses once, one moment, the next thing you're down in the valley again. So what happens when every promise, when that person that wasn't supposed to die passes away? How do you find hope again? And my whole series explores these themes, that there is hope, that's worth fighting for. But you still have to fight through all of the valleys that hit you along the way. And this is kind of where my character of Merlin starts, where he's like, I don't see the point in living anymore. And how he's forced and thrust into having to be involved in the story again, reluctantly, but it kind of takes off from there. And there's time travel. So my character Eleanor, she lives in modern day Wales, and she finds herself in this historical setting with Merlin, and we've got other returning characters like Guinevere, and some of Arthur's men that have survived the battle. So that's another sad thing. You know, you kick off these stories, you've only got 2 of his men left. The rest have all died in battle. So it's a unique take. I haven't seen very many Arthurian legend books kind of swing this way. Has a lot of historical references. People who do love Arthurian legend are definitely gonna see some of the hints of all of the favorite things throughout the stories scattered in there.
That sounds really cool. Yeah, I'm buying all of them for my
Oh,
next
thank you.
vacation. Well, it's funny because I think we talked about yesterday, if I'm writing fantasy, I usually read romance. And if I'm writing romance, I'll read fantasy. So, but I like, and a lot of times I will go for a YA fantasy, but I'm liking the fact these are more adult characters, and I'm guessing there's probably a little romance in there too, right?
Oh, without a doubt. I feel like every good story needs a love story. Those are my favorite kind of stories to read. They're my favorite kind of stories to tell. And there's definitely a love connection that makes it all worthwhile. Definitely the fated mates kind of storyline with Merlin and Eleanor. So
Okay. I was gonna
it
guess
makes
that, but I didn't want to assume.
yes, yes. Definitely, if you love a good romance, it's got a lot of romantic themes throughout, and other love stories even kind of bloom throughout the series.
Fine. All right, where, what? Tell me about their magic. What is their magic system? Is it really defined? Do you plot all that out beforehand? How did you create that?
So I have this because I always love, like I said, to set things in historical context. So I kind of like to think of my magic system in the way of if it was all real, if this was the actual history and I'm telling you what really happened. So I have kind of, and it does create some challenges because I'm trapped within a level of realism when it comes to my magic. So, you know, I take some of the lore of what has been told about the Druids in Celtic mythology and in history. So I kind of took some of that, and then I also coupled with the whole idea of the other world and what would have people seen if dragons were real, if you know, the Fae or all of these magical creatures were real, but maybe we don't see the remains of them because it's for those who were able to see through the veil. They were able to see into the other world, almost like they were all spiritual beings. So like I have a dragon in my story, and my dragon is a guardian of time. So even my time travel element has to do more with magic than it does with like science fiction. So it's almost more like a father time kind of element. But yeah, a lot of my magic has to do with almost like spirits and demons. The idea of the angelic through the eyes of a druidic people or an older ancient class of people, like people who are able to see, and then moments where the spirit realm comes alive to a way that everyone can see through the veil. So you see unicorns, you see dragons, and you see all these things as almost spirits. Or I have a Welsh hound in book 1 that's very scary and creepy, and it is called a Gwaelgi, and that is a Welsh kind of haunted hound that seeks after your soul. And I had this more like a demonic presence where it could disappear and reappear, which made it a little bit more haunting, a little more ghost-like. So touching more on almost a paranormal idea of magic with my stories.
Neat. That's very creative too, but taking something and making it more real. My magic system is a little bit like that too, because supposedly my witches are descended from the angels. So they got their magic, you know, their magic evolved basically from the angels. So that's interesting that you did that take on it.
Yeah, I kind of wanted it to be, again, that nod to, oh, this is still true. We just don't pay attention to what's beyond the veil. And even Merlin's magic and where it came from and his ability to tap into that coming from his lineage of the fair folk. But then maybe an outside something that is attached to his magic that strengthens him and makes him unique from other people who are using magic. And I try to have a really strong delineation between, the fallen druids or the druids that use really dark, ancient magic that requires blood and sacrifice, and versus, the magic that Merlin uses, which has a different source.
Well, that really feeds into your theme of magic and how magic infuses everything we do, right? You just have to
Yes.
stop and sort of smell the roses or pay
Oh,
attention to
yes.
really grasp everything that's going on in our world.
Yes, I mean, which is, my favorite thing is why I love your theme and, finding the magic, I love that because even telling stories, I feel like I'm tapping into magic. I'm tapping into a realm and hearing these stories and telling them through that, source in a way, being able to tap into something that's beyond just myself. And I think that's where a lot of the magical stories that we read do come from. When you read J.K. Rowling's or even C.S. Lewis or J.R. Tolkien, they just have this touch of magic, this ability for their imagination to have gone beyond just what they see with their normal eyes and bring it to other people. And hopefully inspire them, do more than just tell a story, right?
It really, I mean, I get the feeling that I'm transported into the world when I'm reading a book. So I love
Yes.
that quality of reading.
Yes, for sure. That's my favorite part about reading. It's my favorite part about writing because you get to disappear. Like we were talking about, like you're a pantser when you write. We were talking about that yesterday, and there is this essence of you get to find out what happens next as you're writing the story and disappear into your own story as you're writing it. It makes it exciting. It makes you want to sit down at the keyboard and keep exploring your story and your characters to the point to where your characters are actually talking to you and telling you exactly what to do.
They definitely do. I'm guilty of that. So how are these written? Are these written from a first person or third person?
They're definitely a third person narrative. I got very strong POV in book 1 and book 2 that interchanges between Merlin and Eleanor's point of view, but it isn't first person. I'm actually writing a new book currently that is first person. It's going to be the first time I've explored writing in first person, which is going to be fun for me. But yeah, I kind of enjoy that style, the way that Stephen Lougheed writes his books, where you kind of get to be in different characters' heads, but it's not just all the first person perspective. So
Right. That's funny. Yeah, because all my books were first person, and I just did my first third person in a romance earlier this year. So yeah, it was fun because I liked being able to say what the other character was feeling, and
yeah,
you get more of the characters than just your main character.
exactly right. Yeah. Kind of gets the bigger. I when I first started writing my books, and it's not as popular anymore to write in that omniscient point of view, but I started writing my story that way, where you could really get a lot of different point of views, and I ended up kind of learning through that process, going, I really need to refine this and bring it down into just the heads of my main characters, and it flowed much better for me that way. And I really enjoy writing books this way, so it'll be interesting when I get on the other side of my next book and see what I want to do next.
So is the ones in Future Chronicles, I wanted to call them the Otherworld Chronicles for some reason. Is that a complete series now?
It is. It's a complete trilogy. And now with that third book out, the story is complete. However, I've already started writing a series of books that are still within the world of Prydan. So I have a new book that I'm actually 2 chapters away from finishing called The Lost Son of Arcades. And it is kind of a prequel in that it is a backstory of one of Arthur's men. So I'm kind of wanting to write a lot of the backstories of some of these other characters that didn't necessarily get highlighted in my first trilogy, but I'm still fascinated about who they are and, of course, giving my spin on them. This new book will follow the line of a son of Morgan and King Lot. So you've got Morgana, who's, the witch, and her son that came from Lot. And he's kind of dejected, starts out kind of in a cursed, dark place for him, but this is how he becomes the hero. hero. And I won't reveal who he is because it kind of becomes a surprise later on in the story, because it starts out not knowing his true name. He doesn't know what his name is. So that series, I'm almost done with the first book. That particular hero will have a duology, and then from there, it will depend on how those stories come out. So that will all be set in the world of Pride Anne too.
That's really neat that you can have so many different, I guess, themes and stories off of your one trilogy that you already created.
Well, it's kind of fun when you have something that's already been kind of created for you, as far as just the whole idea and concept of Arthurian legend. There's, I think, only one other book that's been written and interpreted more times than the Bible, and it's Arthurian legend, which is just mind-blowing when you think about it. So there's something about these characters that have fascinated people forever, beyond, beyond time. And so, and one of my favorite things as a story writer, and when I'm watching a movie or reading a book, is brotherhood. That's a huge theme for me that really captures me, when friendships and brotherhoods are willing to lay their life down, like with Frodo and Samwise, just that, like, we're willing to fight for one another. And Arthur's men have that in spades. You've got this idea of knights who are honorable and made good choices. Even in the midst of their mistakes, they overcame. So I just feel like the groundwork's been laid to tell stories that have never been told before about them, especially because a lot of the old Arthurian stories are all in prose, and they're very short and quick and have small little details. And there's so much that can be expanded upon and searched out and made into bigger stories that live and breathe.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but once I write a family of characters, I am so dedicated to them. I don't want to let them go.
Yes, without a doubt.
So I have my spin-off series that really keeps me there. And so I can imagine, I don't know if you feel that way too about your characters.
Oh, without a doubt. I am totally in love with my characters. I love them so much. And I think that was the hardest part about being done with this trilogy, even though I get to kind of keep bringing them in into my world. So in the book that I'm almost finishing, Arthur's probably 19 years old, so we're back in that time, pre being a king. And it's neat to be able to bring them in because they've become a part of my life. I've been writing this series over the past 4 years. And when you've got those constant companions just living in your head for so many years, it feels kind of weird for it to be over. And yet the new book that I've just started, it's a paranormal thriller in modern day, totally outside of all the characters I've written, and I'm getting really excited about it. But it feels kind of like I'm betraying those other characters and leaving them behind, and I don't quite want to do that. I'm like, no, I'm not leaving you behind. I just have another, like I always tell my kids, you're all my favorites. And they're like, well, how can that be? I'm like, well, I have a heart for each one of you. There's no competition. Same thing for my characters. It's funny that I feel like I have to say that, but I do.
But yeah, you can just put one away and go do something else. And I'm coming back. It'll be okay.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not leaving you behind.
Well, that's a good segue. Tell me about your author journey.
I was not one of those people who grew up going, I'm going to be a writer someday. It wasn't even in my thoughts. Growing up, I taken a professional writing course in high school, and I loved it. I wrote poetry and short stories, but for some reason, my brain had this assumption that only scholarly sort of people were writers, and I just wasn't one of those people. So I just would never be a writer. And so it never even was a dream of mine, really, but I'd always been fascinated by fantasy. I mean, I read and consumed books like you wouldn't believe it. Stories were always very, very, very important to me. It had huge impact on me. I remember reading George MacDonald's Princess and the Goblin series over and over and over again because of how they made me feel and impacted me as a person, even in some of my decision making, because of the heroic characters in the stories. So I loved stories, and I actually had a really powerful shift in my life just previous to 2020. And And as a result, I had this story running in my head with Arthurian legend. And I had taken an Arthurian legends, university Arthurian legends course. I'm a super nerd when it comes to to all of those kinds of things. But this story just wouldn't let me go. And thought, wow, this is such a good story. I wish somebody could write it. Because
Hello.
I really want to see the story come to life. But I had a lot of a mental battle to conquer in regards to it, because I just couldn't believe that I was the one. And I think it even felt a little pretentious when I started actually maybe believing I could write it. And even my friends and family were like, go you, like, how sweet and cute that you're going to write a book. You know what I mean? It's not that they didn't believe in me, but it's not anything I'd ever done before. And so there just wasn't a wagon to jump on, I guess. And my husband always supported me in it. He was like, just write it. Come on, let's go. And I remember the turning point for me, again, just previous to 2020, I was on a trip with a group of people to Northern Ireland. And we had just hiked a hill that had the actual stone. So at the very top of the hill was this big giant stone, and had the actual stone that inspired C.S. Lewis to write the Stone Table in his books.
Wow.
So this is my backdrop. I hadn't told anybody except for, my husband and my kids, and they weren't on this particular trip. I'd gone by myself. And I was overlooking Ireland. It was gorgeous. Here's C.S. Lewis's, stone right behind me. And a friend comes over, he wraps his arm around my shoulders, and he said, the mantle of C.S. Lewis is on you. It's time for you to write that book. And I went, whoa, to me, there couldn't have been more of a sign.
Mhm.
And it caused me to go, I've got something that I'm supposed to do something with, and I'm not gonna bury it. That was it was a huge moment for me. And so I got home, 2020 hit, and I had nothing better to do. And I turned off the television and I wrote the first book in 8 months. I just
Wow.
sat down and wrote it. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know if I'm a good writer. I don't even know any authors. I don't even know how to publish, like all these things. And I was just like, I'm just going to write. And by the time I had finished that book, I had met authors, publishers, I'd had writing coaches, like all of these things had come into my life. And I had learned so much by the end of book one, that writing book two and three, it was like I had come out the other side totally changed. So I wasn't an author before. I definitely was by the end, to the point that now I work for a publishing company, Square Tree Publishers. So I know the industry inside and out. I've got so many author friends, and now I can't imagine doing anything other than writing books. Stories are constantly filling my head, and I don't want to stop.
That is such a neat story. I was tearing up as hearing about your friend coming over and saying, this is what you're meant to do.
I mean, if you ever needed a sign, right? It was like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, I was talking to another author a few weeks ago, and his was more religious based, but he said, yeah, I had this story in my head and it wouldn't go away. And he said he opened his Bible and literally he opened to the passage that says you should write a book. And this kid was like 19 when this happened. And
Wow.
he said he dedicated an hour a day, no matter what, to writing this book. And then he said, oh, it was horrible. I threw the whole thing away and learned how to write and rewrote the whole thing. And and then he published it. I was like, it was such a cool story. So yeah, I love
Yes.
stories like that.
I think words are important. I think stories are important. And I think I've formed the belief that, maybe some people find writing a hobby. I don't think it's a hobby. I think it's a calling, because I think that writing is so important. And for these stories to come and be such a huge part of our lives, and to come almost out of nowhere and not let us go. There's something about that story that needs to be told. And I don't know how many stories I've watched. I mean, I think of stories like The Count of Monte Cristo or The Four Feathers that changed me, because I watched those stories and they were so redemptive and so glorious that I could never forget them. I could never forget the lessons that I learned from watching those stories. And so I have that idea of magic that happens when we're willing to say yes to the assignment and write those stories. And it is supernatural. I mean, I definitely believe, I'm a Christian myself, and I believe that there is this hand in hand release of these stories that can come from the inspiration from heaven. So,
well, and I think words, I mean, obviously bind people together, whether it's
yeah.
the spoken word or the written word. Those are so intertwined, and historically, tales were just passed down, told around a campfire, around a dinner table, and they were oral, and then eventually they became written down. And
Yes.
obviously now we have video and everything else that we have, but it's just, yeah, I think that's a universal thing that people just glom onto, and fantasies in particular. I think we can explore a lot of human nature through those
Yes.
fantastical worlds that maybe feels safer than
Yes.
exploring them in a real world setting. And I don't know, that's why I feel like I gravitate towards fantasy as a young adult, and maybe still do in some ways.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, there's themes in my story that I could have written in more of a true story context, and that's fine. And I think that writers that write those kinds of stories have huge impact as well. But for me, I feel like it kind of removes that barrier that makes people resistant sometimes to some of the, like my story deals with really heavy grief, but it's intermingled with magic and, fantasy and fantasy creatures and all of these things that kind of make it fun to read and yet still have that impact in a way that maybe people can be more open to than they would have been if it was just plain and simple before, straight in front of their faces.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Very early on, when I first started writing YA fantasy, I came across this podcast, and they were like debating whether fantasy books were good for kids or not. And I was like, what is this even a debate? And the person was trying to argue that because it was a fantasy world, that it wasn't good for kids because it wasn't real life and it didn't help them develop. And I'm like, oh no, I don't think that's right. But that,
I know, I
opinions.
completely disagree.
I know. Opinions. Okay.
Yes.
I wouldn't have realized that was a thing, but okay, let's go.
Yeah. I think imagination is one of the most important tools that we're given as human beings, because it's kind of like where, it's all of our thoughts. It's where our, when we're the lights have gone down and we're sitting quietly and we've got our cup of coffee, that's where we live, is inside of our imaginations. And it's a very powerful tool that I think is important for kids to develop. That's my opinion. Like you said, it's opinions, but that's mine. Definitely fantasy stories are important in pop culture.
Fun. Well, this is my favorite question to ask my authors. If there's one thing, like, I know you have several books, but maybe, I don't know if you have an overarching theme. There's one thing that you want readers to take away or experience, and it could just be that they're having fun. But what is the one thing you would say that you want readers to experience from reading your series?
I definitely want them to feel like they can be a hero, or they can make important decisions that impact even when they're still broken. Like, we're all in a process. We're all, different layers of healing as we grow and progress as human beings, hopefully, that we're all becoming more and more healthy. And I think also the strongest theme in this series, and even the book that I'm finishing, is that the world is hard. We were born into a place where things unpredictable can come in, sickness, wars, bad people can come in and impact your life. We ourselves can make decisions that impact our life, that cause us to have to reap, from the choices that we've made. But that there is always hope. And I think hope is such a powerful, powerful thing to reach for and to never let go, especially in these times when there's just so much, seems like, arguments and darkness and just things swirling, the economy's bad, this and that, and, bad weather, whatever it is that is pushing you down. There is always hope. There's always something more. There is light. It is worth fighting, and that your life is valuable. And that it's never the end. I think, I don't know how many times just as a family, you hit a challenge that you're like, I don't know how we'll come back from this, whether it's financial, somebody losing a job, or, whatever little crisis happens in your life that seems ginormous. The sun does come up the next day. The world does keep turning. Your life will continue on, and joy does come in the morning. And I think that is a huge theme in my book, as I slam my characters with the worst. Hope does always come in the morning. So that's something that I really want my readers to be able to take away from my stories.
I love that. Yeah. It's interesting because I hate writing the end. And in my new series, I always write until we meet again at the end.
Yes.
Saying the end. So yeah, I love that. But I'm definitely buying this for my next vacation. So
oh yay! I'm definitely planning on buying some of your books as well.
Tell us where we can find you and your books.
Well, you can find me at AngelaRHughes.com. Just about anything and everything that you need to find my books, or all of the links where I can be found is there. So AngelaRHughes.com. I'm on Insta, Facebook, TikTok, all the things. So you can find me there. And of course, you can find my book on Amazon or wherever books are sold. You can get the whole series now. It is available. So, and soon updates are coming of the next book that will hopefully be coming out this year very soon. So more is on its way.
Congratulations. And I think you said yesterday you're looking into audiobooks too, right?
Yes, I am currently, there's so many irons in the fire, but they're all right now kind of just gently flowing. But book 1 is soon going to be translated into German. If you didn't know, fun fact, if you are a writer of fantasy or sci-fi, German are the highest readers in the world of fantasy and sci-fi genres. So if you get your book translated, it should be translated into German first. So I'm getting my book, just book 1 translated. We'll see how that goes. And then the hope is to get the entire series on audiobook. So I'm going to be starting a Kickstarter for that because it's a little pricey, but I'm hoping to get the whole series done and on audiobook while some of my other books are starting to be written in the wings.
Super fun. Well, thank you so much for being here, Angela R. Hughes. And Angela and her friend have a podcast, The Ink Mages, and that I was on yesterday. So that was a lot of fun. We're doing some fun crosswork here. So you guys can check out The Ink Mages as well. Thank you for being here, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had so much fun.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.